Day 878 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 567,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,050 in the past day. Then, as for hardware losses, 18 tanks, 17 APVs, 51 artillery, and a staggering 102 unarmoured vehicles. Quite the record. And examples of these are more often than not the Buhanka vans, the Desert Cross ATV golf buggies, and motorcycles. And all topics of which that I think I will be touching upon today due to their now massive prevalence in this war. Then headed straight to the map with more sabotage activity noted in the Krasnodar territory, inside of Russia, as the Freedom of Russia anti-Kremlin partisan movement published new footage of their latest hit, including the message, quote, "The Legion's resistance has again dealt a blow to the logistics of the Putin regime. In the city of Krimsk, a sudden fire occurred in 2 signaling relay cabinets next to the production dispatch station for managing oil trunk pipelines." So it's fair to say that we're seeing quite the increased regularity of these sorts of endeavors and successfully completed tasks inside of Russia now. Then also within Krasnodar, explosions have been reported in Tuapse at the refinery, with drone activity first reported by locals overnight, with, for instance, later impressive footage during the daytime to show the Ukrainian drone, or one such drone sortie in this event, possibly the Lati drone, which can be seen flying completely uninhibited through Russian airspace. Now, this refinery has been struck by Ukraine several times in the past by this point, and for good reason, as it's one of the highest capacity refineries by volume in the country, playing a critical role in the production and distribution of ready-to-use petroleum products. What a staggering blow in morale to the might of the Russian military that gets shattered by these setbacks and defeats. And clearly some damage was done, but we would need to wait for further damage assessments on the refinery plant. Then, on the topic of energy security, and still within Krasnodar, as the region is continuing to experience power outages, with, as of yesterday, 100 substations switched offline. These outages and shutdowns stem from various factors, although a lot of it is due to grid overload prevention, as authorities appear to be implementing shutdowns to manage high demand to prevent infrastructure damage. Now, ironically, the Krasnodar region primarily relies on natural gas for power generation, despite Russia being one of the world's largest natural gas producers in the world. Although, having said that, the Kremlin appears to be prioritizing all available international gas export markets at non-subsidized prices to help fund its ongoing war efforts, clearly at the expense of its own citizens' energy needs. Of course, you may also remember the events of the Big Freeze last winter, where the energy and heating infrastructure all over Russia, including regions within the often more protected Moscow Oblast, had broken down under the weight of the aging infrastructure, and only to be exacerbated by the lack of investment into these critical civilian sectors. So if this is how summer is acting up in the motherland right now, I can only imagine the challenges the upcoming winter will bring. Then on the map, with less relevance but of a similar vein, as Buryatia in central Russia, we saw more infrastructure failing. This time it was a bridge on the federal A333 highway that collapsed. As such, continued events like these underscore a broader issue of neglected domestic infrastructure maintenance. And most Russians within Russia would dare not say the following, that under Putin and his 25-year rule, these sorts of issues should have been sorted out a long time ago. And not just sorted out, but be the envy of the West. Except it's just not the case, as Russia has squandered their natural resource wealth like no other. Then headed into the Ukrainian map today, we'll start out in the northeast and take a quick look at Vovchansk, where the situation in Vovchansk has not changed significantly, but fighting does continue along the main street, Soborna Street, and in the areas of multi-story buildings, where, for instance, most recently, the AFU Lut Assault Brigade destroyed an invader hideout with drones. Then headed down the map where it so happened that Ukrainian forces captured a T-80 tank in the Terny sector, which is almost at the most northern point of Donetsk. And as for the tank, it also happened to be the latest 2022 upgrade variant as well. Then headed back down the map and briefly again taking a quick look at the Bakhmut axis, where some of Russia's most recent breakthrough attempts onto the city of Chasiv Yar were defeated. And so there is now information from Russian sources that state that in order to carry out effective offensive operations in the region, the Russian army now intends to strengthen their units here by 2 more brigades, with the Russian brigade generally comprising of around 2,000 to 4,000 soldiers, although usually on the slimmer end of that scale these days. Then headed down to Russia's New York front, where there's quite a bit of activity in that region there, as Russian forces continue to expand their protruding front all the way up to central New York. Now, beyond this point where they currently hold positions at, this is where it starts to get more urbanized, just along up the north here, thus typically leading to a slowdown with incredibly difficult close quarters combat. And so this Russian offensive from this southern point will also have to contend with the Kryvyi-Rih-Toretsk River that runs through the town, that possesses its own logistical challenges for the invading forces. And meanwhile, not far away, the Russian army has high hopes of taking all of Zalizne, looking to take positions all the way up to the highway and even beyond. Though it is all remarkable how this is all happening right next to the 2014 to 2022 Donbass lines, represented in the purple right there. So your question might be right here, why doesn't Russia also create a third front from where the 2014 Donbass lines are to close the gap? Well, they could, theoretically, but it's all rivers and no roads, which the Russian army is not exactly geared for. So instead, they're taking the highly attritional meatwave approach in the north and the south. And though it looks like a small gap, there is certainly a bit of a way to go. Then also in this region, mostly on the Avdiivka axis, in this case, the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, Megura, and not to be confused with the naval drones of the same name, have stated how they credit the Bradley M2 infantry fighting vehicle for their survival. The crew spoke about how they engaged and destroyed multiple Russian infantry fighting vehicles and APVs right near the edge of the front lines, and had even taken out a Russian T-80 tank with a TOW ATGM, which is a tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided, anti-tank guided missile. The driver also noted that the Bradley's ease of operation was so good that, stating that if you can drive a car, then you can just as easily hop in and drive the Bradley. And they also went on to say that the vehicle has saved their lives many times over. Then taking a look around on the map, because somewhere in the east today, a Russian tank with a double barbecue cage was abandoned and later destroyed by units from the AFU's 33rd Brigade. With just moments prior to this still shot, the tank was engaged in battle, firing its cannon, but not at all moving. Then, moments after this still shot, we saw 2 tankies jump out and completely abandon the tank, with no immediately discernible or apparent reason for the desertion, other than the likelihood that many of these Russian tanks are simply breaking down. Perhaps the engine seized up from lack of maintenance on the old tank platform, or the ammo ran dry, or possibly even the failure of back-end logistics to support the tank with something as simple as diesel fuel. So really, anything that an actual professional army would prevent the needless inefficiency of. Then, also in the east, a Ukrainian UAV reconnaissance team discovered a rare Russian Zemlya mine lane system in the Pokrovsk direction. This system, similar to an MLRS, launches ammunition for remote mining, capable of mining an area the size of several football fields with a single volley. Now, had it not been destroyed by the AFU and actually used in the field in the Pokrovsk frontline direction, it's questionable, given that it's quite the defensive platform dealing in area of denial mining. So given Russia's very aggressive approach to this axis for quite some time now, as part of their summer offensives, it really doesn't make a lot of sense for this platform to be here in the first place. Then also in the east, Russian occupiers receive gifts in the form of anti-tank mines wrapped in trousers, dropped from heavy Baba Yaga drones. And for these ones, there's also magnetic sensors equipped to these, which is triggered even if you do not run directly into the mine. More specifically, these are the PTM-3 mines, which Ukraine has been using for some time now, and they've been very effective. Then also on the map, we saw a Russian assault group in a Chinese-supplied Desert Cross 1000-3 buggy, and I do mean group, with 3 guys in the front and maybe 4 or so in the back. So the AFU FPV flew in and the rest was history. Then also, of note in the east, we saw how AFU soldiers of the 40th Artillery Brigade destroyed a Russian MTLB armoured vehicle. And this is quite outstanding, given that we haven't seen or heard much from the Russian MTLB platform at all lately. And to add some further context here, these armoured fighting vehicles have already since been reported to be operating at critically low levels. Simply put, Russia's running out of them, and they will never be replaced. Unless, of course, you factor in the occasional Desert Cross buggy as being a viable replacement. Then headed across to some news for today. So Ukrainian President Zelensky has announced the arrival of the previously pledged German Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. Zelensky expressed gratitude for the support, emphasizing that this addition will greatly enhance Ukraine's ability to defend its airspace. And so Ukraine has previously been looking to set up 2 new Patriot batteries in the Kharkiv region, which is where you'll find some of the most frequent Russian jet activity right now. So if any Russian jets go down near the northern border with Ukraine in the upcoming days or weeks, then we'll know that the newly arrived battery was very likely positioned here. Then in some more quick Ukrainian hardware update news, so Croatia handed over one AN-32B cargo plane to Ukraine, with a second one on its way after some repairs. Then it's time for another Russian hardware news update, as Russian propaganda continues to actively promote the idea of meat assaults on motorcycles. The only complaint is that they started too late, that is to say, only after a large number of proper combat vehicles had already been destroyed. So now, the 5th Donetsk Brigade has established a combat motorcycle school, highlighting a shift in Russia's tactical thinking. Interestingly, the Russian source also criticizes the Ryazan Airborne Military Academy in Russia that trains the Russian airborne VDV troops, and that the training involves horse riding, with the Russian Telegram source going on to question its relevance in modern warfare. Now, putting aside those comments on horses, which believe me I'd love to get into, it does actually look like the transformation of the Russian army into a motorcycle-dependent force, aka a motorcycle army, is not just a speculative notion anymore, but a bona fide shift in their military strategy. I must remind myself to hashtag motorcycle army in the description below because I've started to organically adopt this term in the past 4 to 6 weeks, on account of it being the most likely pathway of natural progression for the Russian army at this point. Or natural regression, I should say. Then headed across to some more news, a little bit odd this one, but in a startling roundtable discussion at the Moscow City Duma, Russian epidemiology expert Igor Gundarov openly addressed Russia's worsening demographic crisis, linking it directly to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. That's a ballsy move. Gundarov also challenged the lack of transparency surrounding military casualties and questioned the demographic cost of Russia's military ambitions, particularly the goal of capturing Kyiv, which he happened to remark about so nonchalantly. Perhaps he had a momentary lapse of judgment in accidentally voicing the inner aspirations of the Duma circles to which he's a part. He also revealed alarming statistics, including a 40 to 50% increase in mortality rates among young Russians, and that was just for 2022, as it appears that figures since that date or year have not been published. Gundarov then called for the establishment of an authority capable of addressing these issues openly and frankly, but doing so very boldly, suggesting to the exclusion of President Vladimir Putin from these discussions, stating bluntly that Putin is of no use anyway in solving these problems. So remember the name Gundarov, as I suspect someone will be offered a cup of Kremlin's Special Reserve tea soon. Then headed across to a quick couple of funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So starting off, former world chess champion and political activist Garry Kasparov, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest chess players of all time, has been removed from the history books, at least the Russian ones, due to being one of Vladimir Putin's most prominent and vocal critics. He has since left Russia years ago and moved to New York City for fears of his personal safety, so it seems like Putin's ego couldn't handle the fact that one of their greatest chess players of all time was not at all a fan of Putin, proving that, in Putin's mind, sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to save the king by boosting that ego and writing someone out of history. Then to the final main funny of the day, because we continue to see Russia doubling down on anything they can to keep their war going, with 4 of the latest Buhunka Loaf Scooby-Doo vans reaching some sort of standardized serial production with the inclusion of the largely ineffective chicken coop cages. Oh Russia, how about acting like a regular professional army and using some proper military-grade armoured vehicles instead? Of course not, that's far too expensive for Russia. But I do wonder, is Putin even aware of the level that his army has embarrassingly stooped to? Maybe when he gets his morning briefings from the Russian MOD, they always make sure to omit anything like this from the record in the documents. After all, nothing screams military might like a convoy of loaf vans and chicken wire. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. Thanks for the support on the Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. I do really appreciate it all, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!